Hello, and welcome to today's Atlantic Council event with Maria Malmer Stenergard, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of Sweden. My name is Matthew Kranig, and I'm Atlantic Council Vice President and Senior Director of the Council's Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security. In just a few days, NATO allies will gather for the 2025 NATO Summit in The Hague in the Netherlands. It is expected that allies will agree to new commitments on defense spending and industrial production, including a new pledge to spend up to 5% of GDP on defense, up from the current 2% benchmark. The summit comes at a dangerous time in U.S. and international security environment, with Russia's continuing invasion of Ukraine, a major conflict in the Middle East, and increasing Chinese aggression in the Indo-Pacific. Strengthening the NATO alliance so it's fit for purpose at this moment of uncertainty and change will require bold action from the United States and its allies. Sweden has an important role to play as NATO's newest member, having joined the alliance in 2024, just over 1 year ago. Sweden brings a number of strengths to the alliance, including an advanced technology and defense industry, a strategically important geographic location, and a motivation to ramp up defense spending. In fact, just yesterday, the Swedish government announced a new $31 billion borrowing plan to secure funding for increased defense spending. To discuss Sweden's priorities ahead of the NATO summit, it is my honor to introduce our distinguished guest for today's conversation, Minister Maria Malmer Stenergard, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of Sweden. Prior to her appointment last year, Minister Malmer Stenergard served as Sweden's Minister for Migration and Asylum Policy. She has served as a member of the Swedish Riksdag since 2014. Conversations like this are central to the Atlantic Council's mission of shaping the global future together, alongside allies and partners like Sweden. Throughout our history, the Atlantic Council has worked to strengthen the transatlantic alliance as a partnership of common values, but also, importantly, as a cornerstone of U.S. global leadership that brings immense economic, political, and military advantages to citizens on both sides of the Atlantic. So with that, Minister Malmer Stenergard, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. Really great to be here.
We're happy to have you. And to just jump right in, I know you're coming here directly from a meeting with our Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. Can you tell us how did that meeting go?
Oh, it was a very good meeting. It was also very timely, coming up to the meeting in The Hague next week. And we have such a long-standing and good relation between our two countries, and that is something that I want to, of course, deepen. So it was a very good and timely meeting.
Okay, well, that's great to hear. And as I mentioned in the opening, NATO leaders are going to be meeting next week in The Hague for the NATO Summit. It's expected that they're going to agree on a new defense investment pledge, new capability targets, expanded opportunities for transatlantic defense industrial cooperation. So what are you expecting next week in The Hague? And from your point of view, what would make the summit a success?
Well, I have very big expectations for next week, and I think this is going to be a new chapter in transatlantic relations, and I think that it's very good that Europe is now stepping up. I think that criticism coming from different administrations for many years has been legitimate. We have not invested enough in European security, and we have believed in free lunches, but now it's quite obvious that there is no such thing. And I think it's good for us. It's also good for the transatlantic relations that we are now doing the job, and we're very ambitious, and Europe is now really stepping up. Sweden is at 2.4%, and we had this historic decision yesterday announced where all 8 parties in Parliament stand behind the decision to go to 3.5, an additional 1.5 on resilience, if that is the decision, and also how to finance it. So that is a big strength for our country coming into the meeting in Hague.
Good. Well, the defense spending pledge and how to finance it and ramp up, I want to get to that in a moment. First, though, another big issue hanging over the summit will be the strength of the transatlantic bond. We've talked to Ambassador Whitaker, America's new ambassador to NATO, who said that the United States supports NATO, it supports Article 5, that this new defense spending pledge will make the alliance stronger. Yet there have been a number of events over the past several months. J.D. Vance's speech at the Munich Security Conference, the kind of difficult meeting between Trump and Zelensky in the Oval Office that have made some in Europe maybe question the United States' commitment to the transatlantic alliance. So from your point of view, how do you assess the state of the transatlantic bond currently, and will the alliance withstand these pressures?
Well, I think that the events you mentioned are in some way different. So if you listen to what the representatives of the new administration have actually said regarding their commitment to NATO, they have been crystal clear that they are 100% committed, but they are also expecting more from us. So I don't at all doubt that. And that is also what is being said in the closed meetings. So we consider the US as a very reliant partner. But they are also right that we need to take a bigger share of the responsibility for European security. And that is also what we are doing now. And then these other events that you refer to are somewhat different. So Ukraine is not a member of the alliance, and it is our obligation to support Ukraine, I mean, morally as well, but they are not yet a part of the alliance. Their future is in the alliance, but I have no reason to doubt that this current administration is very committed to taking their part of NATO.
Okay, good. And in terms of alliances stepping up, as I've mentioned, it's expected that the big deliverable next week at the summit will be this new defense spending pledge of 5% of GDP. It would be 3.5% of kind of hard defense spending and 1.5% on other security spending, cybersecurity, infrastructure. So the U.S. has been asking allies to step up, but some allies still have not met the 2% mark. Is 5% really realistic, and will Sweden be able to hit 5%?
Well, it's going to be tough for many of the members, but I feel in the room that they are committed and they want to do this, but there will be challenges because it's not only about spending money, it's also about translating them into real capabilities, and we should not lose sight of that. Sweden will be able to invest accordingly, and I think that the decision that we announced yesterday, where all the parties stand behind, is tremendously important. And we have an advantage because we have a rather low state debt. And so we can take loans to cover this, but we will do it. And our aim is to do it until 2030 already. And the other part that you mentioned, the 1.5, is really important because it's about creating resilience that we really need in our society. And we have done a lot of work in Sweden and have a history also of thinking in a total defense perspective and trying to make ordinary people be prepared for a crisis or even a war. But I think we have a lot more to do in that respect. So the countries that have a more strained situation regarding financing, they have now new European, at least the EU members have new tools to use in order to be able to invest in their own defense. And this is crucial, and I think that we're also going to have a debate on how we can ramp up production. And I think from a Swedish standpoint, it is very important that this money can also be invested in production in allies' territory.
Good. Well, you talked about ramping up production, and that's what I wanted to come to next, because even if we spend the money, do our defense industrial bases have the ability to deliver the capabilities we need? And our defense industries, both in the United States and in Europe, have atrophied, as you know, since the end of the Cold War. But there have been some movements recently, including, as you mentioned, this big new European Union package that would finance increased defense spending. But the Trump administration has raised some concerns about this EU package, that it puts in place some preferences for spending in the EU. And I've heard Trump administration officials say, well, these restrictions would just be inefficient because we want allies to get the best capabilities wherever they're available as soon as possible and not have restrictions. I know Sweden's a major player in the global defense industry with Saab producing fighter aircraft and diesel submarines. What is Sweden's view on this issue? First, can our defense industries deliver? And does it make sense to have restrictions in terms of where allies can source these capabilities?
Well, as you mentioned, Sweden has a prominent defense industry. That is something that we are very grateful for. And they also have a very tight collaboration with many other countries, such as the US. And I think that also makes us a lot stronger. We believe in competitiveness. We believe in free trade. And that's something that the US taught us once, and that has made us thrive. We still believe in that. And we believe that we need a competitive industry in order to be able to produce the weapons that we need. So we are very much in favor of allowing investments, for instance, in the UK and US industries. And I think that will also make the alliance stronger.
Yes, and my understanding for a company like Saab, even though it is a European company, that it's sourcing its materials and technology, including from the United States, so that the restrictions could be problematic in that way as well. You mentioned Ukraine at the beginning. I wanted to come back to that, and it's not expected to be a major issue at this summit, and so that would be a change from summits during the Biden administration, where deliverables on Ukraine, I think, were seen as the most important issue. And the Trump administration has changed course, where the Biden administration said we'll support Ukraine as long as it takes. The Trump administration instead seeking an early end to the conflict, an early ceasefire. And so it also seems that the Trump administration wants to shift responsibility for Ukraine more to the Europeans. And so from your point of view, what is the status of the conflict in Ukraine? What is needed to get a ceasefire and secure Ukraine in the long term? And what is the role that you think European countries and countries like Sweden are willing to play to get to that outcome?
That was a lot of questions in one,
Yes.
but it's our main priority in foreign affairs is supporting Ukraine. So we are now stepping up, and the Nordic countries are really in the forefront here. There is a gap to fill, and we need to increase the support in total for Ukraine, and we need to change the equation. So we also need to increase pressure on Russia. And our investments that we talked about in defense is one side of the coin, and supporting Ukraine is the other side of the coin. And this is equally important because the threat from Russia is a real threat to us. And once they are done in Ukraine, if there is not a sustainable and long-term peace, then they will only go back, regroup, get stronger, and attack again. And that might be even closer to us. So I see it as my main obligation to make sure that partners around the world who believe in rules-based world order and territorial integrity to invest in Ukraine and make sure that they can win this war, or at least get an acceptable peace that can also be long-term. So we are now ramping up also the support for production in Ukraine, because they have proven to be very efficient and working 24 hours a day in production. And also they are very innovative. So I think that during the war, and once the war is over, the alliance has a lot to learn from their innovations, and their recent spider web attack shows that they have an enormous capacity and also innovation skills. So we'll see. US, they contribute with some really important strategic support, for instance, intelligence, and it is of utmost importance to keep them involved. And of course, that is something that I always raise.
Yes, and if we are able to get a ceasefire in Ukraine, there has been discussion of maybe having some kind of European security force on the ground in Ukraine to maintain the peace. Questions about an American backstop. What is the role you think Sweden would be willing to play to secure Ukraine after some kind of ceasefire?
Well, first of all, coming back to your question before, it's obvious that Russia doesn't want peace now. And I think that, and Ukraine has been willing to discuss a peace and showed that they're really willing to find a way forward. And I think that we, like I said, will now have to change the equation. But we have to prepare for this to be a bit longer than we thought. And I think that the US might also have realized that there is no such thing as a quick end to this very complicated war. But if we get a ceasefire, then I'm sure that we will have to have some sort of security guarantees. And we are part of the coalition of the willing, that it's called, and are willing to contribute if needed and when needed in the best way we can. I think that there is going to have to be some sort of US backstop, but it's also at a very early stage, unfortunately.
And I think you're right that getting Putin to the negotiating table is probably going to require ramping up pressure on Putin. It doesn't seem like he's negotiating in good faith at the moment.
Exactly. And now we are about to adopt the 18th sanctions package, hitting hard on energy, which is Russia's main source for their war economy. So we really need to continue to find new ways of putting pressure on them. And I believe that the lowered oil price cap that we have put forward and that the European Commission has now included in this package is really important. But I don't really see the G7 agreeing upon that now. And we have done a lot to fight the shadow fleet, because that is the other side. I mean, if we have the oil price cap, then they try to sell oil through the shadow fleet at a different price, and then we have to fight the shadow fleet. We've been quite successful, and it's hurting the Russian war economy. And recent research from Sweden also showed that the revenues from the shadow fleet has lowered this year compared to last year, and we very much appreciate the sanctions also put on the shadow fleet by the US and the UK.
And speaking of U.S. sanctions, as you probably know, there's a bill in the Senate right now that I think at last count had something like 90 senators in support that would really ramp up the sanctions and tariffs against Russia that I think would be kind of necessary to get him to the table. So you talked about the threat from Russia and how that will continue regardless of what happens in Ukraine. So we have a question here from Dr. Anna Wieslander, who directs our Northern Europe office in Stockholm. And she asks exactly about this, that you all are geographically close to Russia. And so if there's a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine, how would Sweden then view the Russia threat? Would you still see Russia as a threat even after some kind of ceasefire in Ukraine?
I believe that for many, many years, Russia will be a real threat to Europe and to Sweden. And that is why we are doing this historic investment in our own defense. And we should never be naive as regards Russia. And I think they will only take a deal when we make them take a deal, not because they want to take a deal. So we have to be prepared.
I think someone in Washington might say, well, actually, we exaggerate the Russia threat. Putin's GDP is smaller than Italy's or Spain's. This is a problem that Ukraine or European countries can handle on their own. Is that the way you see the Russia threat? Maybe exaggerated?
Well, to a normal country, maybe that reasoning would work. But Russia is Russia, and they are willing to sacrifice a lot to sort of rebuild the empire that is their view of themselves. And that is a real threat to us, because they have different values. And we just have to adapt to that.
I think we're nearing the end of our time. If I could just finish with a kind of a big picture question. This is a remarkable moment in Swedish history. As you know, for 200 years, Sweden had a strict policy of neutrality. After the end of, really since the end of the Napoleonic Wars. Now, in the past, really just a year ago, you joined Sweden, NATO. So you're a member of a standing alliance. You've set up a new National Security Council staff. You've written what I think may be your first national security strategy. I understand you're even rewriting textbooks on kind of the value of neutrality versus a military alliance. Can you just talk about what is it like living through this historic moment in Sweden as a government official, but also as a citizen?
Well, first of all, I'm very proud that Sweden has taken this step. It was, of course, a sad reason that made us make this decision so fast. that is the war on Ukraine. But that is something. Actually, I ran for parliament in 2014, and I had like 3 main points that I wanted to put forward in parliament, and one of them was NATO membership. But I never ever at that time thought that I would be in the government that would actually take us into NATO. But that makes me enormously proud, because I don't think that neutrality is the way to work. I think that we should decide that we want to work for peace, security, and stand up for our allies, and not be neutral, because you can't be neutral to dictators and people who attack friendly neighbors. So this is our moral duty to actually pick a side. To be honest, we've been working very closely with NATO for a long time, and many said that we were more integrated into NATO than many NATO members were, even before we were NATO members. So maybe we've been a little bit of a hypocrite, but now we are where we belong.
Yeah, good. Well, I have more questions, and I wish we had more time, but I know you have a very busy schedule, so I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. But thank you very much for joining us today, Madam Minister, and for sharing your insightful comments. You've certainly given us a lot to think about as we approach the NATO Summit next week. We're proud to be longstanding partners of Sweden here at the Atlantic Council. We have the pleasure of working closely with your Ministry of Foreign Affairs and with your embassy, and we look forward to continuing the partnership with such an important ally of the United States. For our viewers, the Council will be on the ground at the summit next week, so stay tuned for our coverage of NATO issues next week in The Hague and beyond. And in the meantime, thank you very much for joining us today, and we look forward to future conversations.